Everyone, I think we are going live. I'm going to double check on the Facebook group to make sure that it does show up because I know the one time I don't check, it won't work. Looks like we are good to go. Awesome. Great to see. So I am Jason Loxton, and this is Makin Bacon. We're all about helping you serve your fans, grow your income, and get the most out of your blog. Today's episode is brought to you by the International Sous Vide Association. I am a part of it, and we just wrapped our 2020 virtual summit with more than 250 attendees, 35 sessions with some of the biggest names in sous vide. There's a great success, and we're just starting to plan our 2021 conference. We're looking for some great bloggers to work with, both as affiliates and volunteers leading up to the conference. We offer 30% commissions for all ticket sales and access to many of the biggest names in sous vide. We had a master chef. We had a two-time winner of Chopped, a bunch of the top chefs at sous vide equipment manufacturers. So if you're interested in sous vide or your fans are, let us know at theisva.org/affiliate. You can become a part of the organization, make some money, make some great connections. And next time the event actually happens in person and not virtual, you get to eat a ton of amazing food. One of our sponsors for the first conference was Allen Brothers, and they donated 150 pounds of Wagyu for our opening night reception. So if you want another steak cook-off, it is a great time to go. So on to the show. As bloggers, we rely on our websites for money, not only through ads, but for selling sponsored posts, promoting our own products, and for keeping our fans engaged. So when our sites go down, it can be a disaster. But today's guest is the perfect person to help us prevent that from happening. He is the founder of NerdPress, a digital agency that provides WordPress maintenance and support services for publishers and small businesses, placing an emphasis on site speed, stability, and security. He has been building, fixing, and maintaining websites since 1998 and has spoken on a wide variety of technical topics, in plain English no less, for numerous conferences, webinars, and podcasts. I can't wait to learn from today's guest, Andrew Wilder, the founder and CEO of NerdPress. Andrew, welcome to Makin Bacon.
Hello. I'm so glad to be here.
And everyone joining us, please say hello in the comments and let us know. We're going to make sure we're going live. And I know Andrew had a few people from his group trying to get in, so make sure you say hi. And he's going to double check to make sure they are in. I'm going to double check that we are in as well. I know StreamYard's been having a few issues about automating the link, and it gets a little confused with Facebook. I think Facebook's saying it's StreamYard's fault, and StreamYard is saying it is Facebook's fault, like any good technology disagreement. Yeah. I'm sure you've never been on the other side of those, have you, Andrew?
Oh, yeah. We're Switzerland.
Just stay out of it.
Stay out of it. Actually, Amanda said she's going to watch. She's going to join a little later. So I just posted this a few minutes ago, so I'm not sure anybody else is going to. But I know people will definitely catch the replay, so I'm sure we're good.
Awesome. Yeah. We have a few people, looks like, showing up live, so should be good. So if you're joining us, say hello, say where you're from, and what the name of your blog is. And any questions for Andrew, and I will be sure to pass them along during the interview. And Andrew, I can't wait to dive into all things websites. But before we get started, I always like to ask, what is it like around your dinner table on a typical day?
Okay. Do I give you the good answer or the true embarrassing answer?
We prefer embarrassing answers in general.
I mean, it's not that bad, but we, since we're home all the time, I'll be honest, we make dinner, we go downstairs, and we eat in front of the television. So, we actually, we're very lucky that both my husband and I are still working right now, and we are safe and healthy. So we are very grateful, but we are working like crazy. I'm doing 10, 12 hours a day consistently. So by the end of the day, all we want to do is have a really nice meal. And we actually do Sunbasket, which is a meal prep delivery service. We've been using them for a few years, and we love it because it's organic and humane. And so it's, the food's really good. I don't love how much goes in the recycle bin, but on the flip side, there's no food waste. So, we'll make a Sunbasket usually, and then take the tray and go watch TV. And we're right now we're watching Match Game. The newish one with Alec Baldwin, that's totally like our guilty pleasure. It's so much fun. And the other series we're watching is Padma Lakshmi's Taste the Nation.
Oh, nice.
It's Hulu, I think. And we just watched her episode about Thai food in Vegas, which is just incredible. And so, of course, the next night we ordered Thai. So it's impossible to watch that episode and not have to have pad Thai. So.
That's the most dangerous thing about watching food programming, is that you just get hungry for food constantly.
Yep.
We're currently stuck on Justified. That's been our binge watch of late, but we've been enjoying that a lot. We also do dinner in front of the TV most nights.
Yeah, we had, when we first moved into our house, we had like a no screens at the dinner table policy. And like, if we're sitting at our dining room table having a meal, we won't be on our phones, and we don't have a TV in the dining room. But now it's become kind of like the ritual to make when we cook together. So we're in the kitchen talking and catching up while we're cooking. And then we go just, shovel our faces with in front of the screen.
Sometimes it's good to be near each other without actually engaging with each other, especially right now when you're near each other all day long. As longtime viewers of the show can attest, I am getting more of a backdrop as my wife's office expands and she gets more equipment as she's working here longer and longer. So we now share our room.
The kitchen is looking less like a kitchen.
Yes, it was bad enough that my office is in the kitchen, and now we have two offices in our New York kitchen.
Wow.
So I want to dive into something that I've mentioned a lot on this show, and that's while creating an SEO heavy site with a lot of traffic and ads is one successful outcome of blogging. There are a lot of other ones, including working with brands, creating products, or founding a company providing WordPress support. How did that transition come about from food blogger to running a company?
Oh, so yeah, it was a windy road. There's a like, I remember, I don't know if it's a New Yorker cartoon, but there was like a cartoon of like what success looks like, and it's like this straight line, right? And then the next pane is like what success really is, and it's like this like zigzaggy random thing, and nobody shows you that journey because it's kind of unfolding. And so if you compare yourself to other people, you'll drive yourself crazy. Having said that, so my original career was actually as a lighting designer. I have a degree in theater from Northwestern, and I was a live event lighting designer. So I would design mostly theaters. I spent a few years working on cruise ships, designing shows for them, which was a great chapter. It's one of those things that's really awesome in your 20s. And then once you hit your 30s, you're kind of getting over it. But I traveled the world and designed a lot of great shows and worked with a lot of wonderful people. But around 2007, 2008, I decided I wanted to find a new career. The lifestyle of a lighting designer is very difficult. It's a lot of travel, a lot of long hours. And I always had a love-hate relationship with it. And over time, the love part was shrinking and the hate part was growing. And so around 2008, I got out of the lighting business and also happened to be out of a long-term relationship around the same time. So it was like this big upheaval thing. And my 2009 New Year's resolution was to try online dating, which is actually a really easy resolution because you like sign up and you've accomplished your resolution, right? So, and then I had this moment where as I was doing that, I'm like, okay, if I'm going to start dating again, I need to get in better shape. And right, because I put on a few pounds, and so I started doing these yoga workout videos, and then I started counting calories, and I started using the Lose It app, and I got really sort of rediscovered health and nutrition. In high school, I was really interested in food and how it affected my body and the planet, and I kind of lost that way. So it was a process of rediscovery that year. And long story short, by the end of that year, I met Maddie, who is now my husband of 8 years. And at that point, I'm so into the diet and nutrition and exercise. I'm like, okay, I need to pursue this because everybody says like, follow your passion and the money will come, right? Or leap and the net will appear, whatever cliche, right? I should also mention, like, this whole time, I've always been interested in computers. I had a side project working for an e-commerce client since 2000. So it's not like I just am like, hey, I'm going to learn computers. Like, I've been doing it and I've always been interested in it, but I never really pursued it as a career path. And so when I basically got really into the health and nutrition stuff, I'm like, okay, I'm going to pursue this. So I need to be an expert. How do you become an expert? And like, well, you go to school, or the cynical answer is you have an audience, right? And so this was the very beginning of 2010 when blogging was, still ramping up and very different than what it is now. So I decided to start a blog. I called it Eating Rules. And I focused really on healthy eating and really celebrating that. And so that was actually, I started it on my birthday in April 2010. And then a couple months later, I saw an ad for the International Food Bloggers Conference up in Seattle. And I'm like, okay, if I'm serious about this, I should go to this conference. Like, I remember that thought. I'm like, I'm going to do it. And I signed up and booked my tickets. I didn't know anybody. I just get on a plane, and I'd signed up for Twitter the week before. Like, this is how new all of this stuff was, right? Like, people still weren't really on Twitter. But the conference was using Twitter, and we had a Twitter hashtag. And so like, I get off the plane and I'm like, I wonder who else is on the train with me going to IFBC. And somebody else who had been on the plane with me in LA, she was in the same train car, and like, I turned around and she was waving at me. It was like out of the Matrix. So we walked to the hotel together, and boom, I have my first friend. Right? Hi, Allison, by the way. And the conference was amazing. I connected with so many wonderful people. And when people found out I was new, they all took me under their wing. And like, I remember I was at dinner with people, and I was like, I only have 5 Twitter followers. And like 3 minutes later, everybody at the table had followed me. And then they were like, oh, you're going to have 100, and like, people tweeted me to tell their followers to follow me. And all of a sudden, like, I had 500 followers. I mean, it was just, the community was incredible. And
that's one of the things I've really loved about getting into food blogging is just how amazing and supportive the community is. I've had the same experience of going to conferences and not knowing anyone and just being embraced by the community, and everyone is there to help everyone else out. It's really inspiring.
And for those of you who someday we'll have conferences again. So for those of you who are really shy and not outgoing, one thing I did for myself during that conference was I literally gave myself an assignment of, I'm going to meet 3 people at every single break. And so I would go up and introduce myself and say, hi, I'm Andrew. What's your name? And literally that's it. And then I talked to them for a couple of minutes. We'd exchange cards. And then I'd say, I'm sorry, but I've given myself this assignment. I need to go meet somebody else. And they'd kind of chuckle, but I'd meet 3 people. And so it was actually kind of an icebreaker too, because we could talk about how awkward meeting people is at conferences. But that empowered me to go through and make, actually get out of my chair during those breaks and socialize and make those connections.
It's awesome having a goal like that you give yourself really, like you said, an assignment, and you have to go forward and do it. And it makes it so much easier because you're not necessarily trying to be friendly or be cool or do whatever. You're just like, I have to do this, so I'm going to go do it, even if I feel awkward right now, and it's completely fine. And almost everyone at those conferences is either super outgoing and doesn't care and will talk to everyone, or they're super introverted and is scared to talk to people and wishes that they had someone to talk to. And so in either case, you're fine going up to either type of person, and they're going to either be so glad that you talked to them, or they'll be like, oh yeah, it's another person to talk to. Awesome.
It's amazing how powerful just, extending your hand when it's safe to do so. Yep. And just saying hi and, introducing yourself. So we did the conference. I then ended up leading a challenge on my blog called October Unprocessed, where I tried to get as many people as possible to eat no processed food for the entire month. And I didn't realize it at the time, but the stroke of genius for me as a blogger was I invited other bloggers to write guest posts each day throughout the month. And so they brought their communities to this challenge, and it started to grow from there. So I've done that challenge every year. It's been 10 years. Now I'm too busy. I don't think I'm going to have time to organize it this year. Like it's run its course for me personally. But over the years, I think 35,000 people have done this challenge.
It's amazing.
Which is, if I'm ever having a bad day, I'll think about that, and that really helps, right?
How many people's lives you've touched?
Yeah. So through that, I got involved in the Food Bloggers Los Angeles group. We're a small group here where we'd meet once a month and do a potluck and talk about a topic. And I was invited to speak about Google Analytics. Erica figured out I knew what I was talking about with the tech stuff. And she's like, hey, can you come do this? And I had no idea what I was getting into. And I didn't have a projector. So I put together this 15-page presentation. I printed it out for everybody. And it took us 2 hours to go through that because there were so many questions. And then afterwards, people were swarmed around me asking me other questions. And someone was like, hey, what's your rate? I want to hire you to fix my site. And I said, oh, no, I'll just fix it for you. No problem. Right. Because I was focused on eating rules really. And she said, no, I insist on paying you. What's your rate? And I threw out a number. And she said, great, can you work on this tomorrow? Right. And I started helping other people with their sites from that. And, that was sort of like the first time the light bulb went off over my head, where I'm like, wait a minute, people take this seriously and they're willing to pay for supporting their sites. And there's a whole bunch of categories there, right? You've got somebody who's trying to make it a business who is looking to invest in their business. You've got somebody who's independently wealthy and just doesn't care about money. You've got somebody who has a hobby and is willing to spend money on their hobby. I mean, think about how much money people spend on golf clubs, right? So why not, if this is your hobby, why not spend money on it too? So that opened my eyes to sort of a broader audience of potential customers, really. So I started working on people's sites. I just worked hourly. I'd do some site redesigns or I'd fix certain things. And then at that point, my plan was to start writing tutorials to train other bloggers. I started a business then called Blog Tutor, a very creative name. Right? So I recommend, by the way, if you're thinking about a business name, don't go literal because it locks you in. Like if I'm the Blog Tutor, it's pretty clear what I do, but that's all I'm going to do, right? So my plan was to build all these tutorials, and honestly, I never had time to create any of them because I was so busy fixing all these other sites. But the next step was, as I was fixing all these other sites, I realized there's all these things that people aren't doing on their sites that they should be, like backups, right? Nobody was setting up backups. So I would set up backups and doing security scanning and uptime monitoring and all these little details where they get their site running smoothly. And I found myself doing the same stuff over and over again. And I'm trying to remember the year. It was like maybe 2012 or 2013 where I decided to turn that into a subscription service. And so I'm like, okay, sign up with me. I'll set up your backups. I'll monitor your security and we'll do this and that. And there were, now WordPress support plans are very popular. Back in 2012, it was like me and WP Site Care and maybe WP Curve. Like that was it, So I was definitely early on that front. And yeah, so I set up the plans. I was still doing the hourly work as well. Then it got to the point where I'm like, hey, these plans are working really well. I'm only going to do hourly work if you're also on one of our support plans, because that way I knew all those bases were covered. And we've actually gotten to the point now where we actually don't do the hourly work anymore. We just do the support plans, and we do small, what we call quick support requests to help. So you don't have to find a developer for everything, but we're not taking on those larger projects. Part of that is so that we can focus on our core competency and actually scale and help more people, but also because that's not our core competency. We want our clients to go to the best possible people for everything. So fast forward now, we're a team of 5 currently. So I've been bringing people on board to help. We're all based in the United States. And actually, Sergio, who was my first hire, I met him at a WordCamp conference. Another story of why it's good to be, why it's good to, introduce yourself. Sergio and I sat at a session on the WP command line interface. We just happened to be seated next to each other. And after the session, he showed me a couple of tricks and we started talking, and he was super generous with his time. I asked him to email me some of those scripts he had written, and he was like, sure, no problem. And, he was a very generous person, and he lives in Los Angeles also. And we went out to lunch a week later, talked for 3 hours, and I hired him. I was like, I know you don't realize this is a job interview, but it is. And so Sergio is employee number 1. And so there are 5 of us now. And actually, I'm in the process of hiring 2 more people, hopefully signing the contracts next week. Very excited about that. And that brings us, I think, to today.
I love that concept of, food blogging encompasses so much and can have so many different facets to it, or blogging in general. And it can be from video work to photography to writing to editing to the computer aspects. And we all have different backgrounds, and we all bring different skills and different things that we like. And if you find yourself really gravitating towards one area of blogging that other bloggers aren't as good at and are continually turning to you for help for, that's a great way to help monetize your blog. And in a lot of ways, it's easier to monetize something for professionals rather than something for hobbyists, which a lot of the cooks are. So I've found there's so many different people that make a living now on skills they learned building out their own blogs that other bloggers also needed, and in a lot of cases don't necessarily like to do. I'm sure you get a lot more joy from setting up, proper backups or restoring someone's failed WordPress site than they do if they had to go through the same process.
Yes, and actually, in the early 2010s, I was wearing a few other hats also. I had started an advertising network called Healthy Ads with my friend Sarah. I was still doing some theater. I was doing projection design for one theater company, and I was still doing that e-commerce site from way back in 2000, which is actually on Yahoo Store. So I'm wearing all these different hats and not truly excelling in any one of them because I'm doing too many things. I couldn't really focus all my energy. And so that was sort of when I realized, like, okay, I have to narrow my focus, I started thinking about what I love doing the most and what's going to keep me interesting. And ultimately, I narrowed it down to Eating Rules and Blog Tutor, technical stuff. And with Eating Rules, I realized I'm not a great recipe developer. Like, I'm not super passionate about recipes. I like cooking. I'm a decent cook, but I'm not into creating recipes every week or every day. And at that point, I had been doing it for so long that I felt like I had already said everything I wanted to say about nutrition. And actually, Michael Pollan's book, Not in Defense of Food, the one right after that, where he says, eat food, not too much, mostly plants. Yeah. That's it. I'm like, okay, I'm done. He can drop the mic. I've got nothing else to add. Like, just listen to that. And instead of finding that disheartening, I'm like, he nailed it, so I don't have to. And that kind of was liberating, so I could then focus on the technical stuff. And for me, it's always changing. Like, one of my criteria is I have to keep learning or I get bored. Yep. And nutrition evolves slowly. Tech evolves really fast, right? It can be frustrating at times. Even though we're into it, we are sometimes like, could there please not be this something new this week, right? So it's exhausting, but it's also exhilarating for us, and we never get bored. So I think there's a lot to be said for narrowing your focus, and for people who love doing recipes, you're probably not going to do really well on your site if you were trying to be all food groups and all genres, right? To find that niche and really hone in on that audience where you find a large enough audience that you can still achieve your goals, but small enough that they are focused. That's really that sweet spot you need to hit.
Yep. I think that's spot on. Is, if you do try to do everything, you're not going to do any of it great. So really trying to narrow it down. And if you do just find that you love writing recipes, and maybe see if you can use that as a service for other bloggers or for people that are looking for recipes, as opposed to just doing one blog of your own that you're trying to monetize and build a fan base around that covers everything out there under the sun. Emily Perrin was on. She says, Andrew, what a cool background. Love hearing about how others got into her work. I got to interview her, I think it was 2 weeks ago. She was a great interview, all about hiring teams and building up a core team around you and how you go about doing that. A lot of that was following your passion and what you're good at and trying to find people to do the rest of the things that you're trying to do. She followed up that comment with, I'd love to hear about Andrew's team, if he's willing to share what kind of roles he has. And just, if it's not a part of the podcast, maybe he could just respond to your comment. But I think all of us are curious. None of us have enough time. We'd all like to know what sort of team you build to move forward and be able to better accomplish your goals.
I'm happy to talk about that. I will say it's hard. And it's a huge learning curve. I didn't set out to be a manager and a CEO. And so embracing the CEO role has been something that it's actually been very difficult for me. I've been a freelancer my entire career, which has meant I've been an independent contractor. And so I used to actually kind of be really turned off by the idea of doing that CEO stuff, as I call it. And now something's clicked where I'm really excited about it. And I think part of it is because I have an awesome team. In fact, that's like the reason, is because I have an awesome team. and so I trust them to do a great job. They're a joy to work with, and they do excellent work, and they're responsible. And above all, I trust them. I think trust is the most important thing. I think that's the number one value proposition with NerdPress, is that our clients trust us. And I have to be able to trust my team. It's the reason why everybody's in the United States. I'm not going to hire somebody outside of the US, because they may be great, but I have, there's a different level of accountability when you're in the United States. And I mean legally, actually, right? I mean, we have non-disclosure agreements. I do a background check, and there's just a different level there. And I want to make sure that everything's going to be great and my clients have 100% trust in us. Thanks, Amanda.
Amanda Mason says, yes, the clients do have complete trust. So if you're out there and interested in what the clients have to say, she full supports in caps with multiple exclamation marks. So that's a good testimonial right there.
So in terms of building the team, I've taken my best guess at every step of the way. When I was putting together a job description, I look up other job descriptions and I pick and choose parts that resonate with me. Not to say that I lift it verbatim, but I see what others are doing and then I try to do it in my way. I also work with a business coach. I work with Wendy every Thursday from 2 to 3:30. We have a call. She does a lot of career change coaching, but for me, she's doing executive coaching. So we do basically a weekly check-in that helps hold me accountable. And she's a prolific note taker. So sometimes I'll hear her turning pages in her book and she's like, but on January 3rd, you said you wanted to do this. How's that going? And I'm like, oh crap, I forgot all about that. And she does it in a great way. If any of you are looking for a business coach, reach out to me. I would love to give you Wendy's information. She's fantastic. Yeah, so when I have questions, I go to her. I also I lean on other people I trust who've been through that. Bjork from Food Blogger Pro comes to mind. So I'm one of Food Blogger Pro's resident experts. So I pop into the forums every once in a while, and I'm on Slack with Bjork. And so when I have a sticky business thing, I'll ask him because I'm pretty sure he's gone through it, and he's a great mentor. So working with mentors is great. To the more specific of what people are doing on the team. We started totally flat where everybody's just a customer support person and we kind of do it all. This spring, I promoted Heather to director of support. So that's our first time where we've had any sort of hierarchy, I guess, besides just me. And Heather's doing a great job. The only thing in her way of being more of a manager is me. I'm trying to step away and make sure the team goes to her instead of straight to me. And beyond that, we kind of take an approach of everybody does everything. We haven't found a way to really silo it. Maybe an exception is WordPress updates. Carrie has really taken the lead on that, and she's managing that. Although we've gotten to the point where we have so many sites we're updating that she needs help. So the people we hire next, part of their job is going to be helping with updates. So once a week, one of our new people will take on 20 or 30 sites and run through the updates. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens when we go from a team of 5 to a team of 7. There's these interesting breakpoints I've found. Going from 1 person to 2 was really, really hard because everything was in my brain. Nothing was documented. And so I had to teach Sergio everything I did, and we had to document and create processes. I mean, it took, 6 months before he really had an understanding of all of the institutional knowledge in my brain, right? So going from 2 to 3 was a lot easier when Ben joined. And Sergio was able also to do a lot of the training too. It wasn't all on my shoulders, which helped. Nice. And then Carrie came in, and then and we're all on Slack and we're communicating throughout the day. And I kind of say we share a brain. And that doesn't scale well either. We're now supporting about 400 websites. We know most of our clients, if you name my site, I can probably tell you who it is and, what their dog's name is, right? we have a very direct connection with our clients, which we love, but that's a lot of information. And if I am working on Amanda's site, I have to make sure that Carrie has that knowledge if Amanda sends in another question that might or might not relate. So we all share email through Help Scout. So part of it is finding systems that we can all work together in that work well for us. Shopping for tools is one of the hardest things, actually, and not overloading tools. Right now we're using Help Scout, Slack, Process Street, which is amazing for repetitive checklists.
I've heard really good things about Process Street.
Process Street, yeah, I'll give them a huge plug. Process Street saved my life. I don't think we could run WordPress without it. We use it for our onboarding checklist, which has 30 or 40 different things we do. And It would be a great tool for anybody publishing. You can create a checklist for every blog post. So you go, oh, featured image, check. And what you can do is document it as you go. So you build your standard operating procedures into the checklist. So if you know your standard featured image is going to be 1200 pixels by 1200 pixels, and it should be a JPEG, and it should be no more than 250 kilobytes, and the focal point should be in the center. So when Google crops it, it will still look good in your rich snippet. There's a little more soul for there. If you know all that information, you put it in that checklist item, right? And then you hire a VA, and boom, it's right there, and they can just check it off. So
we've been using something called ClickUp, which does a few of the similar processes that every time we do a podcast, we basically use the template and it creates the 35 tasks from sending out the original email to let you know what the link is, up through creating the social media posts and making sure the edits go through and checking in with the video editor and all the back and forth. And it's to keep track of all that just became way, way too much, especially as we're a family run company. So my parents help. And as we all started working on a process, we're like, where is this podcast? Do we have the information, or am I holding up? Or are you where? And like, now we know that it's all in one place. We can just look at it, and we can bring in someone else at this point if we needed to, because it's all laid out exactly what we do, which it's been a lifesaver.
Yeah. I think one of the things I love about Process Street the most is we might have 10 checklists open, right? We're onboarding a whole bunch of clients, say. If you update the checklist in the master checklist, it updates all of the active checklists.
Oh, nice.
And that's really important. I remember looking at Asana, and you can build a checklist template, but any open checklists don't get updated if you do it later. And that's a deal breaker, because you need to be able to iterate and improve constantly. And so I'd say if you're looking for any tool, just make sure it has that feature. Makes it a lot easier.
So that you said you're using Process Street, and that was really a big benefit for helping you bring on more and more people and to document your processes.
The other fun thing that we had to do recently was, before 2020, everybody was a contractor. And that's nice and easy, right? You hire somebody, they're a contractor, you send a 1099 at the end of the year, it's done. And as we'd grown, it had grown beyond contract work, really. And so, I found we weren't really meeting the federal guidelines of whatever the IRS rules are. And we're in California, and California really cracked down with the passage of AB 5. And so it became clear that, like, okay, I've got to make everybody an employee. And so that was a huge learning curve for me too. I had to find a payroll company. Everybody's in a different state except me and Sergio. So I had to register in different states to do unemployment insurance. I had to do workers' comp. And now that I've gone through that, like, the next person I hire in Texas, not a big deal. I go to Texas, I register, it's not, payroll isn't as scary to me as it used to be, but I was dreading it. We use Gusto for payroll.
Right.
There are other services out there if you're looking to start payroll that are PEO. I'm totally blanking on what the acronym, Professional Employment Organizations. I'm totally blanking on the name of one of the most popular ones, but they basically are the employer. So that makes it a lot easier, where they're already set up in all 50 states, and you just become an employee of the PEO also. They're a little more expensive, and ultimately they didn't have the flexibility that I knew I was going to want. But if you want something quick, a PEO is probably the easiest way to get up and going and the least scary.
I think your point about not knowing how any of this worked going into it is something that a lot of bloggers need to keep in mind, that a lot of bloggers, I think, view business aspects or creating products or putting out cookbooks as they look at it and say, well, I don't know how that works, so I probably just shouldn't do it. But they're currently doing blogging, which I guarantee they didn't know how SEO worked, and probably food photography and what proper recipe, publication guidelines were, and everything that they've had to learn to do that. And it's a good reminder that even people like you that are running a successful company didn't know how any of this worked. But it's just like we've done with blogging. You did some research, you figured it out, you talked to people that have gone through it, and now you understand it, and it's easy for you to do moving forward. But something I think it's important to not be intimidated by things that you don't know, because most food bloggers are pretty smart, and you can figure out the things you don't know. You just have to put a little bit of time up front to do it.
Yeah, or find somebody who does know. right? I mean, I don't think every problem can be solved with Google. You know, a lot can, but I don't know. The mentorship is so important. And I think that you have to leave room for some serendipity also. Another example, a few years ago, I was at a conference called the Subscription Lab, run by my friend Melissa from the Fresh 20. So she started a meal planning service also in 2010. So she was one of the first ones, built it up to a 7-figure business. Her weekly meal plans are fantastic. And so Melissa's now actually doing business coaching because she's decided she's also more passionate about that as she's evolved, right? And so she started a conference called the Subscription Lab. And I went to the inaugural one, and the first afternoon, Melissa's like, "Okay, who wants to talk about pricing?" And she like stares at me. You know, and her friends, I'm like, "Okay, fine, I'll volunteer my information." Right. So I tell her about our support plans, and I list, you know, the 3 different plans, and you know, she writes columns on the board of like what's included, and then she says, "Okay, what are you charging for these?" And I said our prices, and everybody in the room gasped. They were like, "Wait, what? That's way too low." And I'm like, "Really? I'm charging what my competitors are charging. Like I'm charging what I think the market will bear." And multiple people stood up and said, "I'm not going to hire you because you're not expensive enough. And that means I don't think you're going to be good." Like I was pricing myself. I was sending a lack of quality signal with our low prices, basically.
If we ran into that with our whipping siphon book, it was a shorter book, so we were charging like $15 for it. And we're like, you know what, maybe we should raise this price a little bit. We're more well known now. We can probably make a little bit more profit. And we increased it by $5 and sales went up because now we were signaling that it was a higher quality book, and a $15, $14 cookbook probably isn't going to be that great, but a $19, $20 cookbook, that's a solid normal cookbook. And so people were happier and they spent more money and we got more profit.
It's the hardest thing to wrap your head around. And I think it's the single biggest mistake I see people making is undervaluing them and themselves or their product. I think part of it is because whatever we're doing as a product is easy for us. So we don't place as much value on it, right? But if fixing an unhacked site is easy for me, so I'm going to be like, okay, that'll be $50, you know, but for the person I'm doing it for, restoring their site quickly so that they can get back up and running and not have a horrible sleepless night, that's worth a lot more than $50 to them, right?
Yeah. And it might take you an hour, but so we're charging a lot of money for it, but it would probably take them a week to do it. And so in their point of view, it makes total sense because you're saving them so much time. So
actually back when we had the lighting design business, we worked on day rates, and we had a phrase of the more you charge, the more you're worth. And, you know, I knew people who were equally competent or equally good designers. Some were charging $500 a day and some were charging $2,000 a day. And, you know, it takes some cojones to get up to that. Right. And you have to be good. You have to back it up.
Yeah.
But you're sending a clear message with your pricing. So.
And in some ways it can be easier. If you're charging $2,000, you can do a quarter of the jobs and focus a little bit more on each job and still make the exact same amount of money.
And, you know, now at our price point, we're getting clients who are further along in their journey. Mm-hmm. So we're able to, it's a better fit for our services too. You know, someone who's just starting out, I'll tell them, hey, we're not the right fit for you. We're not going to build your blog from scratch. You need to learn some more. And then in a year, when you've got some traffic, you really figured things out, that it'll make sense for you to come join us. So it really is, it's a win-win that way, right? By making sure it's a good fit.
And that's all part of that niching down a little bit to see what you want to do. If you really love making high-end, you know, wedding cakes or decorated cakes, then if you're starting to get a lot of emails from people saying, well, what's the proper way to like mix the flour and water? You don't necessarily need to spend all your time writing articles for those people if you are writing about high-end wedding cakes, because you can focus on the people that have that experience and knowledge already and try to move them forward, and send the people that are just learning and don't quite, you know, aren't ready for the type of content you're putting out. You can send them to someone that is covering that. And hopefully when they learn the basics and are moving beyond the blog you sent them to, they'll send them back over to you and you can have a nice kind of symbiotic relationship.
Absolutely.
One of the big things right now people are talking about, and I wanted to jump into, is website accessibility. It's a hot topic these days, and I feel like today it definitely means something different than when I got started programming, like last century. What exactly does website accessibility mean these days, and why do bloggers need to care about it?
So website accessibility basically just means making sure your website is usable for everybody. So a lot of people think about website usability, which just means making your site easy to use. So you can navigate it easily. You can find the content or information you're looking for, so somebody can find the recipe. So accessibility is just that extra step of saying everybody can use that regardless of any disability that they might have. One of the tricks I think, and I fell into this trap when I started learning about this, is when we think about disabilities in this context, we tend to think about the very severe versions of that. Someone is completely blind, for example, or they've lost a limb so they can't use a mouse, like big disabilities that are, or I'll say significant disabilities, right? But disabilities actually run on a spectrum, and that's one end of the scale. Somewhere in the middle might be someone who's in their 40s, like me, who is finding that, hey, font contrast actually, like low contrast, makes things a little harder to read, even though I've got good eyesight. It's not, I don't think of it as a disability in my life, but a light gray font on a white background is really hard for me to read. And 15 years ago, I might have been able to read it just fine. So there's
some site now that I read that I just do like a Control-A to select all the text. So that way it like offsets the color and I can read the site better. I'm like, I'm getting old. I don't want to admit it, but this makes it a lot easier.
Right. I have a little plugin that lets me override CSS on sites. And if it's a site I'm visiting a lot, I'll actually add a little bit of CSS to like make the font black every time I visit that site.
What's the name of that plugin you use?
Yeah, let me, what's it called? StyleBot. It's a Chrome plugin. So you can basically just add a little bit of extra CSS styling to override whatever, and when you visit the site, it just remembers that and applies it. So the idea with accessibility is that basically on a long enough timeline, we're all going to be disabled to some degree. As we get older, our ability to understand new interfaces is reduced by about 1% a year. So what we want to do with accessibility is make our site usable for everyone. There's a couple really good reasons to do this. Ethically, it's the right thing to do. But beyond that, that's where most people think of it as like, oh yeah, it's the right thing to do. Okay, I'll do it when I have time. But it expands your audience, so you get more people using your site, so it's good for your business. And now there's a lot of lawsuits happening, and there's been some very high-profile ones in the food blogging space. And so the lawsuits are what's kind of lighting a fire under this. There was also a lawsuit with Domino's Pizza that went to the Supreme Court. It was actually over their app, but they lost. And so basically there's the Americans with Disabilities Act, which was created long before the internet existed. But the courts are interpreting that to apply to websites, because they treat websites as a public entity. So just like a restaurant has to have a wheelchair ramp, or a handrail on the stairs for accessibility, a website needs to be accessible and compliant as well. The government does not have its own guidelines, so it's not like the ADA has a list of things you have to do, but there's a set of standards called the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. It's put out by an independent body, the W3 Consortium. And so the WCAG 2.1 is the current version. And then within that, there's 3 levels of compliance: A, AA, AAA. AA is the accepted standard. So if you are WCAG 2.1 AA compliant, your site will be considered accessible from a legal ADA perspective as well. Having said that, this is a huge body. It's a huge topic. We could go all day on this, but there are some. Basically, in these guidelines, there's various criteria to meet. The site has to be perceivable, it has to be operable, it has to be understandable. So what does operable mean? Somebody has to be able to navigate the website, right? So what if somebody can't use a mouse? They need to be able to navigate with a keyboard. So how can you navigate with the keyboard? The standard on the web is to press the tab key to be able to tab through links. So everybody can go to your site, do it in an incognito window so you're not logged in, and just press the tab key as soon as the page loads. And it should select your header and then select the menu options as you keep pressing tab. A really good site will actually have a menu that appears that says skip to navigation or skip to content. Because if somebody's using a screen reader and it's actually narrating what they're doing, having to listen to the navigation menu every time you go to a new page would be really annoying. So if somebody presses tab, skips to content, they jump all that stuff and they actually start hearing the screen reader read the text. People aren't, you don't have to be blind to use a screen reader. Like people who have limited vision may find it helpful as well. Another big one is alt text. We've done a whole bunch of sessions on alt text, and maybe I'll give you some links so we can direct people to that. The alt text is the alternative text in your photographs or your images. And that basically describes the image or the purpose of the image, depending on how it's used. So in 2011, Pinterest was using that as the Pinterest description. So everybody put in like the whole Pinterest description with a bunch of hashtags into the alt text. And that's actually a huge accessibility problem, because if you're using a screen reader, you're going to listen to that ridiculous Pinterest description. In that context, it's ridiculous. Yep. And if you're trying to get through read through a post or listen through a post, and it says like, this is the best chocolate chip cookie recipe, just like my grandmother used to make, hashtag chocolate chip, hashtag best recipe, and that's on every image, you're not going to want to be on that site, right?
And it's not telling you at all what the image actually is.
Right. So for images used inside a blog post, that's considered an informational image. So what you should do is describe the image as you would to somebody who can't see it. So if it's a chocolate chip cookie, you can say, a plate full of chocolate chip cookies on a blue plate, or something like that, right? Or a chocolate chip cookie with one bite taken out of it, showing the melted chocolate. Whatever the purpose of the image is, that's what you want to convey via the alt text. We've actually created a little plugin to help with this. I'll give this a quick plug, called Alt Text Tools. It's in the WordPress repository. So if you just search for Alt Text Tools, you'll find it. What all that does is it outputs a CSV or an Excel file of every image that's used on your site and what the current alt text is. So you can go through really quickly and see which ones need to be fixed. And then we have a link on the same row to edit the post there. If you've got a lot to do, the Blog Fixer has a really great service to help with this as well, where it gives you an interface and it pulls up the image. It gives you an AI guess at the image, which is not going to be very good, but it's a start. But you can work through your images a lot faster that way. And that's a paid service, but it's a really good one that Chris developed.
Nice. Who is getting sued? So you said Domino's was one. Is this something small, like food bloggers have to start being worried about? And who's doing the suing?
So yes, it's something food bloggers have to worry about. I won't mention names, although I know some of it's public. But any food blog can get sued. The people doing the suing are lawyers. They claim to represent someone who has been injured. There's been damages because they can't use the site. And what's really happening is these lawyers are sending demand letters saying, hey, my client can't use your site. We'll settle this for $20,000 or whatever the number is. And they're just looking for a quick settlement to get some cash. Most, and this is not all, but this is a very common practice right now. It's happening a lot in California and New York, especially. And the problem is, so, if you were to fight that and take them to court, it's going to cost you a lot more than $20,000. And they know that. So you negotiate down to $5,000 and then make them go away. Meanwhile, you just had to write a check for $5,000 and gotten nothing out of it. Yep. And that doesn't stop the next lawyer from coming along and doing the exact same thing to you. So the best defense is to make your website accessible. You don't want to be an easy target. Lawyers and anybody else can use scanning tools to see if there are basic things. Like if you're missing alt text, boom, you're an easy target. If your keyboard navigation doesn't work, if your font contrast is too low, if you don't underline links, like some of the big stuff that's actually pretty easy to do site-wide. If you're not doing that, you're a big target right now.
Is there a good, so you said like where the overall documentation is that kind of lays it out. Is there a good checklist that kind of boils down what a blogger needs to do to, protect themselves and to make their site more readable for everyone? That's, I've read a lot of the W3C stuff, and it's not always the most humanly readable for, especially for a food blogger.
I'm trying to remember. I saw a list on another company's blog post that was pretty good, but it's escaping me which one. So if I can find that, we'll get that in the show notes.
Perfect.
The WCAG also has a quick reference, which is a little bit better than the real guidelines. So that's a good place to start. Another great tool is the Wave accessibility testing tool. It's let me make sure I get this right. It's wave wave.webaim.org. See if I post it in the comments, everybody will see it, right? Oh no, I can't comment. So
if you put it in the private chat, I will put it in the public one.
So this is a little tool that will scan a page and flag warnings on the page or errors. An automated tool like this will only catch about 20 or 30% of issues. So be aware that it is not the be all end all, but it's a great thing for checking things like missing alt text or color contrast issues, stuff like that. So beyond that, I recommend everybody get a professional site audit. We don't do the auditing, so I don't have a vested interest in this. We do have a referrals page on our site with some experts. So if you go to nerdpress.net/experts, there are some folks that we really like there. And if you get an audit, make sure you're getting one that has a roadmap to fixing all of the stuff. You don't want somebody to give you an audit that says, we found 2,000 errors on your site, to hire us. Right? What you want is someone to say, hey, we found these errors. Here are the ones to fix that are going to be site-wide. Here are the things that you need to fix because it's content related. And then either you can hire that person or you can hire somebody else or you can do it yourself. But that way you actually can take the audit and it's useful for you.
That makes sense. It's always a lot easier to get a list of things that you need to fix, and you can decide what you want to spend your time working on versus just pay us money and we'll fix the random things that we're not going to tell you about.
Yep. And a good audit will prioritize it for you. They'll say, hey, these are the really important things. Fix those first, right?
Nice. So one of the big things I think is for food bloggers too, or anyone with a website, is site security and stability, making sure your site is up all the time. You talked a little bit about backups. What goes into, if your site goes down or something really happens to it, you can always back it up. What goes into a backup and how often do you run those, or do you recommend them being run?
So getting backups done properly, there's basically two parts that you have to back up. WordPress is composed of files on your server and then the database. So the files are the WordPress program itself and all your plugins and also all your images. And then the database contains all the settings and all your content, like the actual blog post content inside the blog post that you write, that's saved in the database. So unless you're backing up all the files and the database, you're not getting a full backup. So that's really important. The second part is you want to back up off of your server. If you take a little snapshot and keep it on your server and then your server crashes, you're out of luck. So files and database, off-site, so storing somewhere else. And then the third part of that is it needs to be scheduled and automated. I recommend nightly backups. At a minimum, do nightly backups. Because even if you're not updating content every day, things are changing. People might be leaving comments on the posts, and you wouldn't want to do you would want to lose a whole week's worth of stuff. So a worst case scenario is you lose a day's work. So nightly backups are really important, and it's got to be scheduled, because if you put it on your calendar, guarantee you at some point you're going to stop doing it. Right?
It's never the most important thing until you really need it.
Exactly. And also that's silly, because this is something that can be automated and not, you don't want to create extra work for yourself, right? We take backups so seriously that we actually do two different sets of automated nightly offsite backups through two different systems. We use one that uses a WordPress plugin and one that actually doesn't rely on WordPress at all. It's totally platform agnostic. And we also install another WordPress plugin that does local backups. That's more for convenience. So we use Updraft Plus, and we just do a nightly snapshot of the plugins, themes, and the database. So not all the uploads. So that's not for major disaster recovery, but that's for hey, I goofed, I want to roll something back from an hour ago. It's a lot faster when the files are actually on the server. It's actually pretty rare that we'll do a full restore from a backup. That's our last resort. We'll try to fix the problem first, because anytime you're doing a full restore, you run the risk of losing some work, especially on a very busy site or an e-commerce site where orders have come in. That's really challenging. So if a plugin breaks, we don't need to restore the whole site. We just need to fix the plugin. I think that's all the bases on backups.
And you talked about plugins breaking, and that happens. I know sometimes when you do upgrades. How do you do monitoring to make sure that plugins are always working? How do you kind of track that process of trying to discover problems before maybe the readers discover them?
So we when we do updates, we check the site after. So WordPress 5.5 introduced an auto updates feature. We immediately turned that off because that's the service we're providing for our clients. And if WordPress decides to update something at 2 a.m. because a new release just came out, you may not check it till you're out of bed, and it could have crashed your whole site in the meantime. So I think auto updates have a place for like a portfolio site. That's if it goes down for 6 hours, doesn't matter too much. But for food blogs, this is your business, right? You don't want to risk shutting your business down by accident. And new updates often introduce new bugs. I always tell people to wait at least 2 or 3 days after an update is released. The only exception being if it's for a security fix. So keep an eye on the changelog, and if it says security fix anywhere in there or fix a vulnerability, run the update. So we pay really close attention to that. We also pay attention to which plugin it is. Yoast is likely to fix a bug very quickly because they have millions of installs and a big development team, right? With WP Recipe Maker, Brecht is very responsive, but he's got a smaller audience base, so a problem might not appear right away. And I just totally lost the train of thought. So we're doing updates. Monitoring. The other monitoring that we do is just basic uptime monitoring. We check the homepage to make sure it's up. And if it's down for more than 3 minutes, our clients get an email. We also get a note in Slack. And one of the pitfalls with uptime monitoring that you have to be careful of is if you have caching in place, sometimes the cache page will return and your uptime monitoring is like, great, it looks good, but your server is actually down and the caching is masking that. So we use a service where we're able to bypass the cache and see and make sure the page is actually being properly generated on the fly and we check it every 60 seconds. So that alerts to a lot of problems. A lot of people are like, but my site's never been down. And they might not realize that it actually could have been. If your site is going down for 2 or 3 minutes at a time, once an hour, or every few hours, you might, if you're not working on the site, it's not like somebody's going to email you and complain if the site doesn't load for a few minutes. So you're only going to find out about it if it's a major disaster. This is especially important on shared hosts, on the cheaper hosting companies. Like I'll name Bluehost. They're notorious for throttling your site right when you're getting traffic. And so you get a spike in traffic, the site goes down, or it goes down for some people, but not others. It may work for you and not other people because it can only serve every other page. So the uptime monitoring really helps reveal those flaws.
Yeah, I remember when I was working at ESPN doing fantasy development during one of our rushes, the boss came in and was like, I'm so glad everything's running really well. And for whenever he was refreshing, he got one of the good threads. And so things were loading right away. And we're like, do not show him the access logs of like the average response time, which was like 20 seconds to load a page. And it was like disastrous. And we were all scrambling, trying to fix this. We're like, he doesn't need to know this until after we have a fix in place and it's solved. But it's like, yeah, just hitting refresh isn't going to let you know if your site's down, because it might just be like you're saying, 20% of the requests might be bad, and you're not going to hit that if you're just clicking around most of the time, but your fans will be getting it.
Yep.
You mentioned security fixes. How big of an issue is security and hacking? And, it's all over the news, but for a random person, how much do they have to worry about something like that when you're running a blog?
So a couple of weeks ago, I'll start with a story. A couple of weeks ago, I think it was Sunday morning, I got emails from clients about a friend of theirs who wasn't a client of ours, whose site was down, and they were asking if I could jump in and help. And I was happy to look into it. Turned out what happened was her domain was stolen. So her site was up and running, and the hosting company's like, the site's fine, right? And there's a lot of back and forth. And this woman was traveling internationally at the time. So she didn't have good internet. And so like her site's down, she's getting all these people emailing. So turns out what happened was someone logged into or hacked her registrar account and basically transferred her domain to their own account at that registrar. and then redirected the domain to some sort of banking, like pseudo banking portal. I think they were probably trying to steal people's passwords, right? Get people to log in and get their banking information. It took her about 3 days, I think, to convince her registrar, yes, I really own this domain, please transfer it back. That was a great outcome. 3 days on that was quick. And she's really lucky that they kept the domain under the same registrar. If you transfer the domain to another registrar, it's way harder to prove that and get it back. So, she was down for 3 days, 3 very stressful days while she was traveling, and it's all because one of her secondary accounts got hacked. So how important is security? Very. How important is your business? Very. So, not only are you vulnerable in various places, but it's what are the consequences of that happening, right? So that's the reason we always start with backups. Like, even though her domain was stolen, we knew we had the content. There were backups at the host. They confirmed that. But the domain's pretty darn important. That's where all your SEO is, and all your backlinks are going to that. And if you lose that domain, you can't get that back. You can't redirect to the new one if you don't own it. So that actually prompted me to do a whole post in our Facebook group of like, hey, here's a bunch of things you can do to protect yourself. Most important thing is to use strong passwords. I know people hear this all the time, but it's amazing how weak passwords are. Like, clients have to send us their passwords, and we're like, hey, wait a minute. Like, I see things all the time where it's like one word, like butterfly, and they've capitalized the B and they've put an exclamation mark at the end, right? Or butterfly 12 exclamation mark, because it fits the criteria. You've got a capital, you've got numbers, you've got a special character. It's like, okay, but we tend to capitalize the first letter. We tend to put an exclamation mark at the end, and like, hackers know this. It's right. So really, the only strong passwords are ones that are random. So if you can think of the password, unless you like just do this on your keyboard, right? If you just hunt and pack, or pick random stuff, there's some pattern to it, and that means it's discoverable. So then it's just a question of how badly the hackers want to get in. Mm-hmm. The other big pitfall with passwords is reusing passwords. Don't reuse passwords. One site, one password. That's the key. And the reason for this is password lists do get compromised. So if you're using a password on, let's say, at Target.com, and Target's password list is stolen, and you've used that password on your bank, hey, guess what? The hackers now have your email address and your login for your bank or your email address. So strong, unique passwords. The other big place of vulnerability is your email account. Most people forget that your email account is where all the password reset emails go. So if somebody hacks your email account, they can reset your password on most other services. So you really need to protect your email account. I always get pushback as soon as I say to use strong, unique passwords everywhere. Like, how do I do that without driving myself crazy? And the answer is to use a password manager, which is a piece of software that stores your passwords safely for you. There's some very popular ones: 1Password, LastPass, Dashlane. There's a number that are free, like KeyPass. And they all have different features, but the core idea is you store all your passwords in a secure vault, and then you have one master password. Actually, I'm sorry, one main password. And that password unlocks the entire vault. So it's really important that password be super strong, right? This makes life easier because you don't have to think of passwords, you don't have to remember them. And even better, these all have tools where they will autofill the password when you're trying to log into a site. And so it actually makes your life easier. It just autofills and logs you in. That also makes you more secure because it won't autofill if you're on a fake website. So if you click a phishing link to Wells Fargo, that's not really Wells Fargo because they put an extra 0 in the domain name or something, and you don't realize it, it won't autofill your password because it's the wrong domain. But as a human, you might not catch that, and you might type in your password. So it actually makes you a lot safer in that regard.
I like that. That's perfect. And so a lot of this, especially the backups, the monitoring, and the security updates, that's all things that you provide as part of your various packages, correct?
Yes. And the next big thing we push for is staying updated. After passwords, the number one way sites get hacked is out-of-date software. It's particularly challenging with WordPress because it's all open source. Open source is wonderful. I totally support it. It's what makes WordPress great. But the downside of that is all of the code is out there. And when somebody fixes a security hole in a plugin, hackers can look at what they changed and see what the security hole is. Mm-hmm. So if you haven't updated your plugin to fix that hole, boom, hackers know what it is and they can exploit it. So it's the double-edged sword of open source, I guess. The solution is to stay updated. And we log into sites where like there are 30 updates and they haven't updated in 2 months. Odds are good one of those has a vulnerability that gets fixed, right? Mm-hmm. So a big part of our services is the updates. On our middle and upper tier plans, we'll take care of updates. We usually do it once a week. Like I said, we actually have a human doing it and keeping an eye on it to make sure it doesn't break anything new. But that's really the most important thing. Strong passwords and staying updated are the top two things.
Especially with the staying updated, right? Like the hackers aren't necessarily targeting your site. They are scanning all the WordPress blogs they know that are on the internet and checking to see if the vulnerability exists or does not exist, right?
Yep. It is. I guarantee you, everybody who's listening to this right now or will be listening to this, your site is under attack right now. We set up audit logs, and we can see when bots are trying to guess passwords, and it's shocking how much this is going on. We also implement a firewall to help prevent this problem. So we now use Cloudflare Enterprise. We've grown enough that we can be an enterprise partner. So we are able to really protect the login page, not only just with their bot protection, but we've got rate limiting. So like if a bot tries to guess the password more than 10 times in 10 minutes or whatever the number is, it'll block them for an hour. So we try to strike that balance. So if a human forgets their password and is trying to remember it, we won't block them. But I can look at the stats and see how often those URLs or those firewall rules are blocking bad traffic, and it's jaw-dropping. I mean, I look at one site and in 24 hours, they had over 10,000 hits. Yeah, it's crazy.
Yeah, I have an automated error service that when anything breaks on my code, I get emails. And so I have a bunch of filters set up because it's not a WordPress site. And so I have filters if it goes to like /WP admin /whatever, like that I don't need to see that error because that doesn't exist on my site. And I was getting emails constantly from people trying to hit the various, WordPress or PHP, admin logins to see if they could get in. And it's just a constant flow of people trying to get in. And it's not that hard to keep them out most of the time if you're updating your software and just keeping things up to date, like you're saying.
Yeah. And there's some good plugins also, if you're not going to get a full firewall, that can limit the number of password attempts. Like limit login attempts is good, or login security solution. So you can just install one of those plugins and that'll do that kind of rate limiting to help protect.
Well, awesome. Well, Andrew, I appreciate you coming on, sharing your expertise, talking some about the stuff that you do and the things that everyone needs to do to keep their own sites safe and up there and accessible for everyone and grow your team and do everything else that is super important to food bloggers. And if they want more information from you, if they want to look at your services, they can go to nerdpress.net. Is that correct?
That's correct.
They can check it out. Make sure you get in touch with Andrew and, take one of these things that's probably on your mind, off of your mind, so you can focus on the things that you enjoy doing and that you're good at doing.
Absolutely. Well, it was such a great time talking with you, Jason. I had a lot of fun. And it's great to meet all of your audience.
Well, I appreciate you coming on. I appreciate the people that were on here and asking questions. And this has been Makin Bacon, all about helping you serve your fans, grow your income, and get the most out of your blog. Till next time, I'm Jason Logston. Thanks, all.